Greetings and welcome back to Room 303 and our chats with Emily as we are calling our readings through the poetry of Emily Dickinson contained in the Johnson edition. We turned out a poem 257, Delight is as the Flight. It is a remarkable little poem that tries to in some ways capture what it is that makes life so precious and at the same time so tragic, because of course the greatest feelings rarely last. Here we have Emily as philosopher poet, and we're going to enjoy the game that she plays with her similes. Notice delight is as the flight. We are in some ways back to Wordsworth's "My heart leaps up when I behold a rainbow in the sky." We've given full lectures on it at LearnStrong.net. Speaking of LearnStrong, our assumptions are that you've been following our stuff at LearnStrong.net. Down that left-hand side, Chats with Emily, our playlist. I'm hopeful that you've already worked through our set of introductory comments. I'm really hopeful that you've worked through the preceding 256 poems. We just finished with 256. If I'm lost now. The power of this poem is that it will draw in many ways from your earlier readings. We're going to even comment on a couple of those poems. The transitory nature of delight is, of course, going to give rise to the question of theodicy, the last of our big five: epistemology, what you can know; ontology, who you are; psychology, the study of the individual mind; sociology, the study of the collective mind; and then finally, of course, theodicy. Why must there be pain and suffering? Why is it that delight can't last forever? We will finish this study with a referencing to Shelley's Skylark, which I think very much Emily has in mind in a poem like this. The other thing I love about this poem is that it's a fun poem to read out loud. I'm hopeful that I can read it at least well enough to give you some sense of the joy, dare we even call it the glee, of this poem. Delight is as the flight, or in the ratio of it, as the schools would say, the rainbow's way. Skein flung colored over rain would suit as bright, except that flight were ailment. If it would last, I ask the East, when that bent stripe struck up my childish firmament, and I, for glee, took rainbows as the common way, and empty skies the eccentricity. And so with lives, and so with butterflies, seen magic through the fright, that they will cheat the sight, the dour latitudes far on, some sudden morn, our portion in the fashion done. Now, this is an amazing poem. It's not often anthologized, and yet I find it to be one of the more remarkable poems. Of course, 258, there's a certain slant of light in her analysis of despair, follows this poem on delight. We can obviously compare the two poems, and we will once we finish with the next one. Let's, first of all, though, just pay attention to all of the S sounds of this poem, those hard sibilants as we pointed out in earlier studies. And her use of the word delight will take us back to our study of poem 121, as watchers hang upon the east, as beggars revel at a feast, by savory fancy spread, as brooks and deserts babble sweet, on ear too far for the delight heaven beguiles the tired. Of course, delight is an enigma, isn't it? Because if you're happy and you know it, something's wrong. Children don't swing at the park saying, I am happy, I am happy, I am happy. Why? Because they actually are happy. Yes, of course, the parent swinging the child can easily say, I am happy. Why? Because as parents, of course, grandparents, we enjoy the experience of delight in a much different way from the child. You remember that Wordsworth, we're referencing Wordsworth a number of times in this lecture, that Wordsworth in Tintern Abbey will say, and so I dare to hope, though change no doubt from what I was, when first I came among these hills, when, what does he say, like a young deer, like a young deer, I leapt through the meadows, I ran over the mountains. In other words, no need by another thought further supplied is the way he says it. Notice here, delight is as the flight. That is to say, maybe we would say the flight, the bird, the butterfly we'll get to, or in the ratio of it, and this will take us to poem 125, remember, keen and quivering ratio of it as the schools would say, we're back to the scholars again, the rainbow's way. Now, I think scholars have pointed out that there's an intentional difficulty with these opening lines to try to capture, maybe we would say, the elusive nature of delight, right? So its delight is as the flight, or in the ratio of it, the attempt at an average to explain it, as the schools would say. Her derivation, or her disgust at times with the scholars, with the elite, with the schools, here is played out again. As the schools would say, the rainbow's way, and then she'll say it, right, a skein flung colored after rain. Think about skein, and when we come to poem 423, we'll have it as a skein of misery. The idea that the skein is like the thread that's wound around the wheel kind of loosely. It's a brilliant way to think about rainbows. Flung, colored after rain, and of course the rhyming is wonderful here, but think about Noah and the flood motif, and of course the rainbow afterwards. All of that would suit as bright, except that flight, we're back to the opening line, were ailment. In other words, we love rainbows as children because they're so unusual, but they don't last for very long. And that frustrates the Emily, who then does turn to childhood days, and the quote where she asks if it would last. And of course there's the line of all lines. We long for those events that are so joy-filled, and yet we know how quickly they will pass. Notice she says, I ask the east when that bent stripe, it's a wonderful way to talk about rainbows, the bow, right? Struck up my childish firmament. You'll remember this use of the word childish from poem 77 when we were there. And firmament for us is the attempt to try to, encompass what it's like to be a child. A lot of course, Wordsworth comes to mind here, no doubt. That longing for childhood joys, right? And I, for glee, took rainbows as the common way, right? In other words, of course, rainbows are always, children look at rainbows and they imagine, oh, I'm always going to get to see something as amazing as that. And empty skies, the eccentricity, she'll only use that word one time in all of her poetry, and it's here. And that's remarkable because we think of Emily in some ways as very much a person of eccentricity. And so now to finish, and so with lives. In other words, these lives that we enjoy, that are so precious to us, they're so ethereal, aren't they? They come, they go so quickly. And so with butterflies, so notice she jumps from rainbows to butterflies, seen magic through the fright. Notice it's from flight to fright, that they will cheat the sight. Try to catch a butterfly and it flies away, right? And dour latitudes. Notice her use of the noun as a verb here. Dour latitudes far on. Some sudden morn our portion in the fashion done. Did you hear all those harmonies of the R, the D, the N sounds in those last four lines? And so with lives, and so with butterflies, seen magic through the fright, that they will cheat the sight, and dour latitudes far on, some sudden morn our portion in the fashion done. Now, of course, the last word is, what is it, a sad word for us that says what in 2a? The more intense the delight, obviously, the quicker it seems to depart. Think at 2b of the symbolism, of course, of rainbows and butterflies and the transitory nature of that, the word choice of eccentricity, and of course Emily's similes here. But as we said, we're going to skirt away from Wordsworth for a second, go to another British Romantic poet, and a poem that, of course, we've given full lecture on at learnstrong.net. You remember these lines from Shelley's To a Skylark? We look before and after, and pine for what is not. Our sincerest laughter with some pain is fraught. Our sweetest songs are those that tell of saddest thought. Of course, I think Emily is channeling very much this idea, and it's not a butterfly or a rainbow, although, of course, Shelley, I think, taught Emily how to look at something like a rainbow and like butterflies and derive such powerful insights. Finally, at 3b, how do you deal with the fleetingness of life, the fleetingness of joy, the fact that it comes, but it seems to only stay for a while? Much like our study of Emily, right? Thanks.